what are the possible ways in which investment managers make decisions or individuals make decisions, how that could lead to maybe certain aspects or certain what they call factors in asset markets can lead to excess return. So that is one side of the game, which I don't really work on so much, but I know a little bit. And then you have broadly corporate finance to understand decision making of firms. So why do firms take certain decisions? And within that, you have banking as well, comes broadly within that umbrella.
Today's episode is basically about one big question. When money meets technology, do humans get smarter or just more creative with bad decisions? Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of School to Startup, brought to you by Tracxn, a private market intelligence platform that's been supporting the global university ecosystem for over 12 years. Through our university partnerships, we work with institutions driving innovation and entrepreneurship. And this series highlights the academic leaders making that happen. I'm Harish, your host today. Joining us today is Dr. Mrianal Mishra, Assistant Professor, Senior Lecturer at the University of Melbourne. He worked at the intersection of finance, technology, development, and human behavior, which is a very elegant way of saying he studies how people make money decisions under pressure. That sounds fascinating, isn't it? All right, let's get started. Dr. Mrianal Mishra, great to have you with us.
Thanks, Harish. Looking forward to see how I can contribute to this series.
Great. So you've worked across different countries and institutions before joining the University of Melbourne. So what drew you into the space in the first place? And when did finance become personal and not just academic?
So I was always interested in finance. So I did like most people from my generation, a typical career path was, do engineering and do MBA. So when I was in my bachelor in IIT Kharagpur, and by the time I was in my third year, I realized I find engineering too dry. And I started to read about economics and finance. And if I remember correctly, I picked up Economic Times. I was barely 20 years old. I didn't understand much, I'll be very honest, but I still struggled through it. And this is a time when, there is not that much faculty support. There's not that much resources, and definitely there's no AI to also teach you, right? And by the way, even YouTube had not taken off. So it's not that you could have just searched for lectures. I just struggled my way through, read things here and there. And ultimately, I realized that I want to do something which is an intersection of economics and finance. My father, he's a CA, so he always, I kept hearing about, the stock market ever since I was 5 years old. And to the extent of making paper planes with those share certificates in the 90s. So I've heard about these things goes deep into your psyche at some point. And I also found it more interesting because you're actually dealing with something that is very dynamic. So don't get me wrong. Engineering is very important. Pure science is very important. But the problems are very direct. They don't change. Okay, you want to solve this problem, and then we want to do it in the best possible way. A lot of engineering is about optimization, in terms of time and cost especially. But what is interesting about economics and finance is that it ultimately drives from human behavior or human decision making, which can be completely crazy at certain times. You expect the market to move a certain way, and the president comes and showers 10 tweets and it goes the other way, right? So that is the way things are these days. So that is why I found it more dynamic and interesting to be in this field, which changes even now, every 6 months or a year. And just to end it off, I was looking at, um, so in our department, there are, the papers presented in the conferences for the last 15, 20 years. The conference our department organizes. And what I saw is that the papers that were accepted or presented 15 years ago are absolutely nothing what people are working on as of today. So the field changes very fast in that sense. It evolves very quickly, it changes very fast because the world around us changes very fast. So yeah, I think that was one of the reasons which attracted me, the fast changing nature of the whole subject.
Interesting. Your research spans, financial intermediation, or development of finance, fintech, and even machine learning, and language data in banking. So, for
Mhm.
someone outside academia, how would you explain what you really study in simple terms?
Sorry, I didn't get you because your voice is cutting out a bit. So for someone outside,
For someone outside the academia, how do you
yeah.
explain what you really study in the simple terms?
So uh, excuse me, sorry, I have a bit of a cough. So apologies if I cough once or twice. So the thing is that academic finance is very different from practical finance, and this is what many people don't appreciate or don't understand really. So practical or in the professional world, you are just you have to meet certain targets or you have to take out new products. At the end of the day, a customer or a business has to adopt your product. There are also a lot of regulations, by the way. Finance is one of the most regulated fields, especially more so after 2008, after the financial crisis. Uh, in terms of what you can offer today, even if you try to do a startup in India in finance or fintech, it's way harder than starting for example, a consumer goods company, right? A hair care company or a personal care company. You and I can join forces and we can start it with barely any regulatory approval. But if you were to have a startup which offers certain kinds of ETFs to customers, we'll have to go through a bunch of other regulations. So the practical side is, first of all, very different and much harder to innovate in as compared to other sectors. This is my view. I'm not saying other sectors are easier, but the regulatory hurdles are much more. Uh, and then not to mention like RBI, SEBI, and each country has their host of 3, 4 regulators who will be at the top of your head when you try to start something. For academic finance, what we try to primarily study is how so that it is very broadly divided into two broad aspects, I would say. One is asset markets. So by asset markets, I mean equity markets, bond markets, even commodities, and how they behave or how they have evolved. What are the possible ways in which investment managers make decisions or individuals make decisions? How that could lead to maybe certain aspects or certain what they call factors in asset markets can lead to excess return. So that is one side of the game, which I don't really work on so much, but I know a little bit. It has its own theories and models and was one of the first to evolve in the early 90s. And then you have broadly corporate finance to understand decision making of firms. So why do firms take certain decisions? And within that, you have banking as well, comes broadly within that umbrella. So based on certain regulations, how does that impact the bottom line of banks? How does that impact their decision making? And then you can, just go complicated ad infinitum, in the sense that then you can, instead of firms, you can go to individuals, see how individuals make decisions. So a lot of this revolves around two ways to do it. One is you can sit and write a model. You're good in math, you can write a model, you can solve a model without any numbers whatsoever. Just a simple economic model. Another way, which has become very popular in the last 20 years or so, especially with the advent of computing technologies and algorithms, is using empirical data. So if you have large amounts of empirical data of certain companies, individuals, banks, then that can allow you to study how they have made certain decisions, why they have made certain decisions. For example, why how would a bank lend after certain natural disasters? Does it actually start rationing credit or reducing credit even for good borrowers? I'm just throwing a very simple research question out there, which has been studied, obviously, and so on and so forth. Recently, the advent of Gen AI has made a lot of data sets available because so far, if you can understand, this whole game revolves around having access to numerical data, quantitative data. But now, because we have generative AI, you can also create data points from textual data, from text, which opens up a lot of avenues. Now, for example, say you want to study something about how the gold standard worked. By the way, I mean, this is something that people may think is very obvious, but it's only in the last 50 years that we've not had some kind of a gold standard. For all the history of humanity, we had a gold standard. So, but because we were born in this 50 years, we think this is absolute truth. Anyway, so for example, say you want to study of how the banking systems would work in the gold standard, and it was very popular. I mean, India was under British occupation, of course, at that point of time, but in the US, this was a very dynamic system in the late 19th century. But there is no data, right? So how would you get hold of the data? There's very little data, very little curated data. So here is where you can use text to understand from, say, newspapers. Are people complaining, that this gold standard results in them not getting enough loans? Maybe it is good for the consumers, bad for the producers. So those kind of things, textual data allows you to get at for places and for times where you would not have had curated numerical data. So this is broadly, I mean, I give you a very 30,000 feet view of what I do or what most people do, with some examples littered here and there.
Interesting. One of your research themes look at fintech during the crisis period, especially COVID. So, what did that period reveal about how people really adopt financial technology?
So that was a paper that we started working on in the beginning, around March 2020, just when COVID was hitting. And what we observed from the data was that, one, the adoption of financial technologies or fintech, there is a clear bump after COVID. So whatever human costs and medical costs COVID had, definitely one of the positive takeaways was that it resulted in a massive adoption of what is called finance in the form of technology. So people stopped going, and those behaviors most likely have persisted. That people use more apps and more online tools for finance as compared to in being in person or in physical. But here also there is a bit of a rupture between advanced economies and developing economies. What we noticed was, in advanced economies there was more of a uptick of what is now called neobanks, so app only banks, whereas in developing economies there was more of an uptick of those kind of fintech companies that offer some credit. So outside the traditional banking system, but someone trying to offer some kind of credit that is app only. And this makes sense because a lot of the people in the developing countries, they have arrangements or they run businesses which, when hit by these kind of shocks, they really don't have even money to tide over the illiquidity periods. So this is what we observed. Also, what we observed, and which turned out we could never continue with that. We thought that could be an interesting, actually, idea for a company. We had the data. We thought was that a lot of fraudulent service providers also picked up in developing countries. So you had people posing as firms that would provide some kind of loan, but maybe they're just skimming your information or taking some entry level fee from you, 100 rupees, 200 rupees, $5, but basically not offering you anything in return. So there was a lot of spurt of these fraudulent apps as well, especially in emerging and developing economies.
As finance becomes more app-based and less human-facing, where do you think trust breaks first? Is it on product design, incentives, regulation, or is it user awareness?
Definitely not product design. What was the second thing that you said?
Incentives, regulation, or user awareness?
I would say definitely the last two, among between the last two. So there is lack of user awareness in general. People don't know how to use these tools. Sometimes, even if people are educated, they may not be financially educated, and on top of that, they may not be digitally educated as well. So there is a education is quite broad, but within that you have financial and digital education, and they may not be overlapping with that individuals. You might be a very qualified medical professional or a doctor, but some of us who are especially of the older generation, they'll not be financially or uh, digitally so savvy, because this is not what they do on a day-to-day basis. So the job of the regulator becomes more important, as well as the job of the the provider, to make sure that they are able to maintain trust through checks and balances. There's a fine line, because sometimes what we see is the extent of this desire to make sure that there is no fraud has also led to frictions in ease of doing work or ease of doing business. So that is something some providers have to figure out as well. I won't take the names, but say large banks in India, I mean, now they are being too conservative and too careful, to the extent that if you're a, I mean, 99.9% of us are not going to go ahead and do all of this stuff, that you face frictions in your day-to-day transactions and your tasks and all of that. So that should not happen. I understand that that you have to prevent fraud and you have to create trust in the system, but not make the system claustrophobic in the process.
And this series is School to Startup. So I want to connect your work back to entrepreneurship. In your view, what do students and early founders usually misunderstand about innovation in finance and financial services?
So I think my understanding is that sometimes the products are great. So they are approaching it more from a tech side, what is called in India colloquially as the tech stack. But many times there is not as much variety or nuance on the finance side or on the product side. So, I mean, India has some very good coders and people who understand technology very well, and this is a fact. Having lived away for a long time, I think we have quite a good talent when it comes to that. And hopefully, even in the age of AI, we are able to maintain this edge. I mean, AI can be your assistant. AI is not going to do the thing for you, and I hope we'll be able to use it better. But we are very good at that. But I sometimes feel that we do not have as much product breadth or diversity as a lot of other countries. Probably it has to do a bit with regulation as well, that the regulators in India are much more risk averse and conservative. But that is one aspect maybe the startups or entrepreneurs could look at. So, for example, like a simple example, um, the mutual fund industry in India, right, is still very traditional. It's very new, by the way. So, if you think about it, when I was in my BTech, not many people even knew about mutual funds or bothered about mutual funds. And it's only in the last 10 years or 15 years after AMFI's mutual fund Sahi Hai campaign took off that, that this thing about mutual funds and investing in mutual funds has become a thing. But there is very little innovation in terms of offering. You have hundreds of funds offering hundreds of different kinds of ETFs and products, but they're all copycat of each other. You'll probably find, 10 funds offering Nifty Healthcare Index mutual fund or something like that. So there can be a bit more innovation in that regard in terms of product offering, because the customer, I believe, wants much more. The Indian consumer is very cost. Um, uh, they look at cost a lot, but they also want a certain kind of quality on top of that. And we can give them a better offering than just technology, being the part. So technology is necessary but not sufficient. I think there can be more innovation in terms on the finance side of how to innovate on the product side. That is something if early startups can understand or do, that will be great. Problem there is that most of these guys are young, right? I mean, 18, 20-year-olds will not have that much of a deep understanding on the product side. So maybe it would be good to speak to someone or have a mentor who understands the space better, where they can actually innovate on the product side as well, and not just offer a low-cost app-only version of what is available physically. So,
Yes, sir. You work with students in a university environment. So, what mindset shift really needs to happen when some student moves from doing well in school to actually building something in the real world?
nowadays students are so. I hope it changes, but nowadays students are also very different compared to our times. So they're a bit more. They expect the things to be given to them as compared. But anyway, I mean, this is how things are. I mean, generations change, times change. This is what I have observed. So at least in the last 2, 3 years, 3, 4 years when I have been teaching. So the focus is a lot on somehow get the grades and not so much about understanding the subject. Regarding what change has to happen in terms of mindset. So the thing is, the university system or the school system from where they come, it teaches you structured problems. So this is something that students don't understand. Like when you are in school, and then even if you go to the university, you have a structured syllabus, a structured course. A professor or a lecturer will come and give some structured presentation. Then you have to do some structured tutorial list of questions. And then you prepare for an exam, which is again very structured. But the only truth about life is that it is not structured. I mean, is better than anyone else. Like life is completely unstructured. Forget about solving a problem. You don't even know what the problem is. First of all, you have to first identify the problem, and even then, it can be solved in probably a million ways, right? Whereas the university system trains you. Somebody has already identified the problem, which is not a real problem, by the way, some kind of fake problem, and then there is only one way, or maybe a couple of ways at most to solve it, right? So that mindset has to be broken, ideally. How they can break that is a different story for everyone. Every child is special, kind of, so there is no one answer to that. But that mindset is something that they have to break. So it's something like they have to have this is my objective. I have to break that mindset, and then what should I do? What steps should I take to break that mindset? And that path, then that backward induction path will be different for different people. It won't be the same. So I think that is very important. And especially more, again, as I'm repeatedly saying, in the age of AI, nobody cares if you know 5 formula or 3 programming languages. So what matters? The AI is basically an assistant. Everybody has an assistant now. Earlier, only the CEO or the CFO had an assistant, or the full professor. Now everybody has an assistant. But the thing is, they have to raise your level such that you can use it as an assistant. So you have to be able to think innovatively. That is the first point, and have complete grasp of the subject, so that if the assistant is making mistakes, you can tell the assistant what to do. And depending on the instruction you give or the prompt you give, it gives you totally different results, right? And a slight change also changes the results completely. So these are the 2 aspects, I would say. One, to break that structured mindset, and second, you have to really, really cultivate that inquisitive and innovative nature. Otherwise, this is not a warning, but the way the next 10, 15 years is going to evolve, people who don't do that will not be able to achieve success.
That was amazing. Today's conversation gave us a great insights into how finance, technology, trust, and entrepreneurship are shaping the world students and founders are stepping into. Thank you, Dr. Mishra. Thank you so much for being part of this episode and sharing your insights.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Great. And to everyone watching, if you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, subscribe, and click the bell button so you never miss an update. See you in the next one.